The Big Ten feels wide open at the top. Can the Hoosiers knock off that other team from Indiana?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I want to thank you for making us your first listen or watch and remind you that you can catch every episode of our show ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to you everydayers joining us and, of course, the Locked On College Basketball Discord members. Let's get right into it, everybody. Welcome in. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on the show today, hard to believe that we are now less than a week away from the tip of the regular season, but we still have several super fun team previews to get to this week, starting with the Indiana Hoosiers and our guy from Locked On Hoosiers, Mr. Jacob Goins. Jacob, it's good to be together. It's time to be very optimistic and hopeful about Indiana returning to their rightful place among the Big Ten elite. And that's where we start, is just a look back at last year, where the Hoosiers were 19-14 overall, 10-10 in Big Ten play, tied for 6th in the conference, lost in the Big Ten quarterfinals, and then didn't make the NCAA tournament. It's always weird when one of our blue blood schools doesn't make that. So, Jacob, I think that's just where I want to start. Do you feel like we are going to have another one of those seasons, or with everybody coming back and everything that came in, is there enough to really get back to where the Hoosiers expect to be?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me back on. It's great to be talking basketball. As much fun as football is, and we're going to keep hammering football on Locked On Hoosiers. Basketball season is right around the corner, and I really started to feel it this past weekend watching a ton of exhibition games, including Indiana beating Tennessee in Knoxville. I know it's an exhibition game, but I think that spoke really, really highly of what this team is. And yeah, you mentioned last year, and man, that's not okay here. I mean, that's just not acceptable. You understand that, and a lot of big blue bloods do. Missing the NCAA tournament is just not how this place goes. And fans are letting Mike Woodson know about it. They let him know about it. And there were legitimate conversations a year ago of whether they were going to let him go. And it seemed to be a little early for me. And now with all the recruiting misses that Indiana continues to have, and watching big names go other places on signing day or decision day, yeah, it seems like it's a very important season for this team. You lose Khalil Ware to the NBA. He's already balling out in his young career in the Miami Heat. But you replace him with Umar Ballo, the center transfer from Arizona. The struggles that this team had a year ago with guard play, no consistency, lack of scoring, couldn't take care of the basketball. You go and replace that, and hopefully you fix that problem with Cannon Carlisle and Miles Rice, a couple of Pac-12 transfer guards that have come in. They're going to be in the starting rotation. And you also bring in a couple of big guys and shooters, Luke Goody, the sniper, Langdon Hatton, the big man, and you still return Malik Renew, Mackenzie Mbako, and Trey Galloway. So I think it's a really good combination, Isaac, of returning guys, freshmen like Bryson Tucker, and then transfer portal guys, the number one portal class in the country. So, yeah, expectations are high this season in Indiana, but isn't that every year in Bloomington?
100%. And it should be, right? Like I said this we did Louisville last week, and I think my comment on that show was college basketball is better when Louisville is doing what Louisville's supposed to be. And the exact same is true of the Hoosiers. And, you know, you referenced some of the misses, like Braylon Mullins not being kept in state. He committed last week to UConn. And we haven't talked about it, Jacob, but I can only imagine how much weeping and gnashing of teeth there has been in the Hoosier state.
Yeah, between Braylon Mullins and Jalen Harrelson and guys like that. I mean, Malachi Marino. I mean, guys like that have just gone to UConn and Notre Dame and Kentucky and just going other places. Yeah, it stings. And what stings so much about it is Indiana has been right there. Like, we've been in the Final Five. We've been in the Final Three. And yeah, we're struggling to keep kids in state. And when they do, they go to Notre Dame of all places. And so it has been very frustrating. The Hoosiers do have Trent Sisley, a top 75 player in the recruiting class who is committed to Indiana. But yeah, some of those big swings and misses, man, Hoosier fans are tired of being burned. And so I think that's what ramps up the pressure even more on this upcoming season.
And that's a great way, because now we've looked back a little bit. We've looked ahead a little bit to 2025. And Jacob, as we get into this year 4 of Mike Woodson, and it really does feel like, from the outside looking into Bloomington, like a true hot seat season, despite the fact that, things, I wouldn't say they've been awful, but they've not been Indiana level. And we've seen that when you don't perform at Indiana level at Indiana, you're shown the door. And, after 2 20-win seasons, last year not quite getting there. I think there's a lot of Xavier Johnson injury wrapped up in last year that really hurt things. But truly, do you think this is a make it or break it hot seat season for Mike Woodson? If, let's say, we're sitting here talking next year, and the Hoosiers have failed to get to 20 wins, have failed to make the NCAA tournament again this year, which I don't think is going to happen, good grief. But hypothetically, if that does, is Mike Woodson still Indiana's coach?
I don't think so. I don't think the fans would allow Indiana in the athletic department to keep him around, because if Indiana were to have another non-20-win season, another miss of the NCAA tournament, what that would tell me, Isaac, if I had my crystal ball, if I was a fortune teller, is that it looked the exact same as it did a year ago, which was poor three-point shooting, poor defense, great inside the lane, but anything outside of 8 feet, Indiana just couldn't do. And man, if they broke 70, we were celebrating. I mean, streamers were coming down to Memorial Hall, or an Assembly Hall. It just wasn't something that Indiana could do consistently. And so that's what that would tell me, is if Indiana has another bad season like that, which I'm with you, I don't think we do, but it would mean that it looked the exact same. The fans were miserable the entire time, and it would show us that maybe Mike Woodson just doesn't have what it takes. But I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe Indiana does have a bad season. But yeah, if one does occur, I think he's gone at the end of the year.
Oh, man, here's to hoping that is not what happens. And part of it, you mentioned it talking about it, Jacob, there, the 3-point shooting from last year. Hoosiers were 32.4% as a team, 255th in the nation. Do you think that Mike Woodson and the staff addressed that well enough? Obviously, Luke Goody comes over, but I don't think either you or I think he's going to be in the starting lineup. Does this team have enough firepower from deep?
It's a good question, and we're going to find out. And the problem is the exhibition game didn't show us a whole lot. Indiana started 0 for 11 from 3 in the exhibition against Tennessee. They ended up hitting, 4, I think, in the entire game. Like, not a great starting point for Indiana, but they will be better. And I think the guy that's going to lead the charge here, Isaac, is going to be Mackenzie Mbako. I keep talking about him in a sophomore surge. I think he's going to be more comfortable. He's put on a little bit of weight. I think he's just going to have a very free type of aura, if you will. And I think he's the best shooter on the team. Wiles Rice and Cannon Carlisle are good, but they weren't really known for the three-point shooting in the Pac-12. No. They're more of a guard, ball in the hand, make a play type of guards. And so, yeah, I look for Mackenzie Mbako, Luke Goody, and don't sleep on Malik Renew. He can knock him down if he needs to. We'll be better. I just don't know how great we're going to be.
Okay, so all that said and done, let's bring it together. I said it in the cold open, but it really feels to me, Jacob, that the Big Ten is pretty wide open this year at the top. It kind of like, was it 2 years ago where it was like Northwestern finished as the 2 seed, but if they had lost their last game, they would have been like 9th or something. Like, it feels like it could be that all over again. And so I want you to answer this question for me. Indiana wins the Big Ten because, and on the opposite side, Indiana doesn't win the Big Ten because.
It's a really good question. I think Indiana wins the Big Ten this season if they can get truly 8 or more guys involved. I think your starting 5 is pretty much set, which we're going to talk about later. But I think you went and got guys for depth pieces, and Indiana just didn't have that a year ago. I mean, outside of a 6th man, they were just No, I mean, they were done. They didn't have any bodies that you could trust to bring in the game, whether it was at the guard position, the forward, or even big man. It wasn't what Indiana needed. So I think Indiana wins the Big Ten if you can play 8 or 9 guys that legitimately contribute to this team offensively and defensively. And Indiana loses or does not win the Big Ten if they have a lot of the same from a year ago. They can't shoot from outside. They can't defend the outside right there. 3 is more than 2, Isaac. Indiana fans like to tell me that quite often. And so if those same problems exist where, yeah, you can knock down all the layups and dunks you want, but when you give up a 10-0 run and 3 of those are threes, you can't keep up that way. So I think that's what happens here. If Indiana cannot figure out how to shoot the 3 or defend the 3, they may be in the same position they were a year ago.
Man, and Jacob, it's so good to know that Indiana fans are so knowledgeable in math and that 3 is indeed more than 2. Yeah. Best news I've heard all day. Now, look, you and I have referenced a couple times who we think is going to be in this starting lineup. There are a whole bunch of starters back, but are they all going to start again this year, or will some of the newcomers take over those starts? We're going to talk about that in just a second.
Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Again, FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, Jacob, we're now going to move into talking about the personnel for Indiana. And one of the interesting things is you've mentioned a couple of these transfers, 3, I think, that it seems like we might feel like are in the starting lineup. You obviously lose Khalil Ware from last year's starting lineup, but bring back Malik Renew, Mackenzie Mbako, Trey Galloway, and Gabe Cupps, who were all part of the vast majority starting lineup. And then the other biggest starting lineup also had Xavier Johnson in it. Obviously, he's gone out the door now. And so as you start to look at this, Jacob, how's that going to go? Do you think some of these transfers come in and take some of those jobs? How's this going to shake out?
I think most of them do. I think you're going to see more transfer starters than you do returning starters this year for Indiana basketball. And, you know, at the end of the year last year, Indiana, we knew that we were in a position where we were going to have guys transfer and we were going to have guys graduate, right? And that's sort of how it played out. And there were also a couple of question marks of, okay, would Khalil Ware go to the NBA? He did the right thing. Yeah. He was picked 15th overall. I think that's a pretty good decision. I think he's fine. I think he's going to be okay, especially in the bank account department. And so he went off to the NBA. Questions were, okay, can you keep Malik Renew? Can you keep Mackenzie Mbako? Does Trey Galloway decide to come back for one more year? He's been in college a long time, but he is an Indiana Hoosier. He is a favorite in Bloomington. And so a lot of those questions started to, fly around. And when guys started leaving, and then Malik Renew said he's coming back, and Ware was gone, and Galloway was coming back, and Gabe Cupps was back. He got a lot of starts a year ago with all the injury problems of Xavier Johnson. We understood, all right, Indiana's got to go get some dudes. You got to go get some guards. You got to go get some shooters. And now you have to go find yourself a new center. Did we know we were going to go find another 7-footer? Well, not necessarily, but that's exactly what Indiana did. And so I think my starting 5, and I've said this for months, pretty much since May, when we knew everybody that was in here, got a little bit of flack for this, but I think from what we saw in the exhibition, I think this is what it's going to end up being. I think Miles Rice is going to be your starting point guard. I think Cannon Carlisle will be your starting 2. I think Mackenzie Mbako, again, a young freshman a year ago, took him about half a season to really get comfortable, Isaac, but then he started playing really, really good. I have him as your starting 3 in Bloomington. I have Malik Renew as the starting 4. I think that's where he's most comfortable. I think that's where he's the most effective. And I have a feeling my go-to saying this winter is good things happen when number 5 touches the basketball. Malik Renew, I think, will make this team go. And then Umar Ballo, the Arizona transfer, 7 foot tall. He's a tree on the inside. He will be your starting center in Indiana. So Rice, Carlisle, Mbako, Renew, and Ballo. I think that is your starting 5 that allows you to bring Trey Galloway, a seasoned veteran, off the bench. You have Gabe Cupps, who, look, he was thrown in the fire last year.
That's right.
See. I mean, we'll see what he can be as a guard, right? And then you also have Luke Goody, Langdon Hatton, and Bryson Tucker, Ja'Kai Newton. Those 2 are still on the injury side of things, so we're not 100% on when they're going to be in action. But that gives you a lot of bodies, man, and I think that's what Indiana's going to roll with.
Yeah, and, flowers to you, Jacob, for sticking to your guns there, even as you got some crap on that starting 5. That is the exact starting 5 that we had in the exhibition with Tennessee this weekend. Way to go. And I'm not going to relitigate it. I have the exact same starting 5. Jacob just laid it all out. No need for me to say anything else about that. Jacob, let me ask this. When people push back on your starting 5, is it just like the assumption that Trey Galloway is going to stick? I think anyone who is a basketball knower knows exactly what you said about Gabe Cupps. He was forced into action before he was truthfully and truly ready to do so. But is it about people expecting Trey Galloway to still be in the starting 5? Is that where the pushback comes from?
It was, especially early on, because again, Galloway, I mean, he's an Indiana man. I mean, he is it. When you think about Indiana basketball for the last handful of years, Trey Galloway is in that conversation. And I think it's going to be a good thing with him not being a starter because, man, you look at last year with the injuries to so many guys, I just think he felt a lot of pressure. I think he felt a lot of weight on his shoulders to be that dude. I mean, this is a guy that almost single-handedly beat Kansas last year, but then had some horrific shooting games. And now that I believe, will be coming off the bench, I think he's just going to be able to play freely, play open, just come in and have a little fun and be that leader that doesn't always have to have the basketball in his hands and just be a seasoned guy. And so that's where a lot of the pushback was early on was, how could you not start Galloway? He's been here forever. He's our guy, yada, yada. And I said, look, I get it, but I think other guys give us a better chance to win. And that combination is Miles Rice and Cannon Carlisle. And I think you saw that in the exhibition on Sunday. Galloway still coming back from an offseason surgery. But yeah, that's where a lot of the pushback was how could you start Carlisle over Galloway? I just think Cannon gives us a better chance to win.
You mentioned that offseason knee surgery that Trey Galloway is coming back from. Jacob, do you know anything on his timeline or when he'll be full go?
He's been active, right? He's been in practice, kind of shooting around. They're basically taking it slowly and not forcing him back, especially if he's not projected to be a starter, right? They're just going to kind of work him in and get him going. Same thing with Ja'Kai Newton too, which is an interesting story because this is a young man that has yet to see hardly any playing time in Indiana because he just can't stay healthy. But we've heard and seen that he's been active kind of the same way Galloway has. But man, when he does let it go, he's a really, really talented player. So Indiana may start as a depleted team and they may play well. And then halfway through the season, boom, they're going to whip out a couple of more tools off their belt and nobody's going to know that it's coming. So in terms of those two guys, yeah, I think it's just kind of a slow, steady process. They're not rushing anything. And when the time is right, they'll be on the floor.
And the Hoosiers do lose leading scorer Kalel Ware, but then Renew is your number 2 leading scorer last year. Mbako, number 3. Galloway, number 4. Your 4th leading scorer probably coming off the bench of a team that wasn't what we expect for the Hoosiers. But it's still good news when you combine that with walking double machine Umar Ballo and these the what we project as the new starting backcourt coming in. And so, man, good things seem to be in store for the Hoosiers. Now, how are those games going to play out? What are those good things going to look like? We're going to talk about the schedule coming up in just a second. That seems to Jacob and I like this non-con slate might be a tad bit cupcakey. We'll talk about that in just a second.
Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's really a way of life, especially nowadays here in Bloomington. It takes a lot of energy to power through all day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like us, the fans who are the first in the parking lot and who are the last to leave. We see you. You know what else gave me a bit of little Hoosiers fan fuel this week was the D'Angelo Pons pick 6 against Washington. It got the whole game started, and I hope that we can see something similar this weekend against Michigan State. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why we limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. Again, that's 5hourenergy.com.
All right, we want to wrap up our Indiana preview by taking a look at the schedule, which started, as Jacob talked about, with a fun exhibition game this past weekend. Love that we get to do this now. Thank you, NCAA, for getting something right once. And as Jacob said, Indiana goes down to Knoxville, knocks off the Vols 66-62. Again, no Trey Galloway in that game, no Bryson Tucker in that game, incoming freshman guard. But, Jacob, you mentioned the kind of three-point struggles early, but let's be fair, Tennessee's defense is always something to not be trifled with. What, as we think about the schedule and what we can learn from this, what were maybe one or two of your biggest takeaways from that exhibition?
Well, Miles Rice, a guy that we've talked a ton about. I mean, he was your leading scorer, second leading scorer behind Malik Renew. Malik had 21, Miles Rice had 20, but it was just the command that Miles Rice had, and he was not afraid to take it to the rack, and he could finish through just about anybody. And that's something that Indiana just didn't have a year ago. Again, we talked about all the injury problems and the inconsistency at the guard position. Man, you give the ball to Miles Rice, and he's gone. I mean, he will go whether he is 80 feet from the basket, 50, 25, doesn't matter. He's going to get to the basket and just make plays. So that's the first thing that stood out to me against Tennessee was Miles Rice is him. That's what I wrote down, is that he's just a leader. He is a pest on both sides of the basketball, on both ends of the floor. And then Indiana didn't forget about who they were. They still used Malik Renew. Ballo had an okay day, but the defense is what really stood out to me, because you mentioned Tennessee's defense, and they were annoying. Believe me, it's hard to compete against a team like that. No. But Indiana matched them play for play, just both ends of the floor. Like, Indiana's defense was better than I saw in any game last year, just the tenacity and the effort and the execution. So between hopefully a better guard room and elevated defense, I think Indiana could be dangerous this year.
Ooh, baby. Now, we start obviously with the non-con slate coming up very, very soon. It's so wild that we're less than a week away.
I know.
But Jacob, one of the things about this non-con slate, we have Battle for Atlantis, which is going to be great. Indiana starts with Louisville, and then we'll play either West Virginia under new coach Darren DeVries and his just absolute dude of a son who's going to be their leading scorer, Tucker. But it'll either be them or Gonzaga in the next game, and then finishing up with Oklahoma, Providence, Davidson, or Arizona. That should provide three great matchups. Hopefully it's Arizona in the last one, because that's the best team of that bunch. But then outside of that, Jacob, when we look at the other 8 non-con games, just one other high major opponent, and all 8 of those games are at home versus SIUE, versus Eastern Illinois, versus South Carolina. There's your lone high major opponent versus UNC Greensboro, Sam Houston State, Miami of Ohio, not Florida, UTC, that's Chattanooga, and Winthrop. Jacob, as you look at that, do you feel like I do, where it's like, I don't know about this, man? It feels like a pretty weak slate.
It concerns me. It really, really does. And this is not new information from me. My people at Locked On Hoosiers, I've been saying this for quite some time. I mean, you see trends around college basketball now where big name teams are playing other big name teams. Look at Gonzaga or Alabama or Auburn or even Duke and North Carolina. I mean, they've decided, you know what? We need to get better in non-conference play rather than having a bigger number in the win column heading into January. We need to have some tests. We need to maybe even have a loss or two. And look, I'll be honest, depending on how the battle for Atlantis goes, I don't know if Indiana will or not. I mean, it's very possible that we could be undefeated out of non-conference play, because if you look outside the battle for Atlantis, which we'll get to in a second, it's South Carolina. That's it. I mean, it's South Carolina. Now, I will remind people that either A, are Hoosiers fans and watched a year ago, or B, just didn't watch Indiana a year ago in non-conference play. They struggled mightily against non-conference opponents. It was bad, and that should have been a sign for us. But I think this year that won't be as much of an issue. And so you have to take care of business in those, beat, I think, a really solid South Carolina team, and then I say make a run in the battle for Atlantis. And I just want this team to not run into Rutgers and run into Michigan and run into Ohio State and these types of teams. Of course, Purdue and Oregon and all these other schools in the Big Ten. I don't want us to get to January and then start to get exposed and then have to start changing things and then have to start fixing ourselves, when we could try to do that in November and December like a lot of other big name programs do.
So with that said, what has to happen at Atlantis, since that's really the only testing ground, Jacob?
I say win it. Win the thing. I mean, you start with Louisville, who, yeah, it's a big name, but you know as well as I do, they're still on the up and coming. They're still not to where they have been in my lifetime, right? And then you just have to play the team in front of you and hope that you can make a run. You hope you get Gonzaga. You hope you get Arizona. You want those big names. Like, sure, it'd be cool to play you have West Virginia and Providence and Davidson, like those types of teams, but man, I want the big ones. I want the good ones, because that's what's going to make Indiana better in the long run. If you get them, great. If not, play the team in front of you and just execute at a high level.
Okay, good. So we moved to Big Ten play. As per usual recently, we will have 2 Big Ten games kind of mixed into the non-con slate. That'll be versus Minnesota and at Nebraska. But then you just look at this whole slate. Every Big Ten team either makes a trip to LA or to the Pacific Northwest. For Indiana, it's going to be to the Pacific Northwest, at Washington, at Oregon. And the tough thing, Jacob, just to go ahead and zoom to the end of the schedule, is those are 2 of the final 3 games of the regular season. How, if you're Mike Woodson, do you kind of handle that trip?
Yeah, and that's coming out of a February slate that I think is really, really tough for this team. You play Purdue a couple of times. You've got UCLA in there. And then, as you mentioned, you go out west for 2 games, and then you come home and play what I think is going to be a much improved Ohio State team. Like, you've got to find a way in a trip like that, depending on how the season's going. I mean, I think sitting here in late October, early November, saying to split those games is fair. Right? I mean, go out there. If Oregon's as good as people say they are, Washington could be a dark horse. Who knows? I mean, I think it's fair to say, hey, go out there, play well, execute, and split the 2 games. If you do that, then you're probably okay.
Man, going to be fun. Again, we think this, or I think, I'm about to find out from Jacob here in just a second. I think this Big Ten is going to be a lot of fun with a lot of good teams and probably a lot of warts on everyone, which is going to be an interesting thing to say. So, Jacob, looking at that side of it then, what is your projected finish for the Hoosiers in the Big Ten, and what's your regular season record finish?
That's a really good question. I think in terms of expectations, I think Hoosiers fans are wanting this to be a major turnaround. My prediction is top 3 in the Big Ten. I think they should be in it at the end. I think they should be wanting to compete and be competitive, and it come down to those final few games. I think being top 3 in the Big Ten with a chance to win it. I think being one of those teams that gets a bye in conference tournaments, and then being, I think, a top 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Now, if you're top 5, okay, I guess that's acceptable. Anything outside of that, though, we're not going to be happy in Bloomington. So I think a top 5 seed nationally in the NCAA tournament is the bottom, the floor for what this team needs to be. But I'm looking even higher than that. I'm looking at between a 2 and 4 seed overall in the NCAA tournament, 20 or more wins. I mean, look, non-conference play, you got to take care of business. The only loss I think you can afford is a loss at the Battle for Atlantis. Other than that, you got to clean sweep those. My issue and what I'm scared about for the Big Ten, though, it's going to be really deep, and there's going to be a lot of good teams. I'm afraid that it could eat itself alive, man. And other conferences are going to find that out too. The SEC, the Big 12, the ACC, the Big East, like they're all going to find that out this year too. So I think Indiana, top 3 in the Big 10, no less than a top 5 national seed, and maybe try to win a championship somewhere.
Man, I love to hear that, Jacob, so much. And I'm actually pretty close to where you are. I have the Hoosiers 10-1 in the non-con slate. I'm with you. You cannot drop a non-Atlantis game in this. It's just would be unacceptable. And can't happen. Conference, I'm with you. It's so hard to look at. Like looking back to last year, Purdue 17-3 wins the regular season. Illinois was second and they were just 14-6. So like you could be looking at a team that has 4 or 5 Big Ten losses that wins the conference regular season. Like that's a very possible thing. And so it's so funny because for Indiana, there's an expectation with this non-conference schedule that it's got to be nearly unblemished. And yet in the conference portion of the schedule, you could have a quite blemished schedule and finish, as you said, top 2 or 3. So that said, I'm going to go, I flipped that, 14-6 in the regular season, but that finishes the Hoosiers in my mind 3rd in the Big Ten. That's what I'm going with, which is a conference record of 24, or an overall record, of 24-7 in the regular season. Again, I have the Hoosiers 3rd in the Big Ten, and I'm with you. I'm going to go a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Jacob, I think they do enough against a conference that is very deep. If there's not, what I think remains to be seen with the Big Ten is if there's any like elite teams, but I think there are very, very strong teams in the Big Ten. And that's, I'm curious to see if an elite team emerges, but that's how I see it coming into the season. Jacob, any closing remarks as we get out of here?
Look, football season is a lot of fun, and we hope to cover this thing into the new year. But basketball season is upon us. Exhibition is behind us. We're getting ready for the start of the regular season. It's going to be a better year in Bloomington, I'm telling you. And there's going to be a lot of good teams out of the Big Ten. I don't know how many make it into the tournament. I would love to see more than half get into the big dance. I think that would be a huge mark for this conference. But overall, Indiana will be better this year. But it's a huge season for Mike Woodson and Indiana basketball fans.
Oh, man. Folks, make sure you tune into every second of it. The Hoosiers tip off next Wednesday is their first game against SIUE. Make sure you are ready for that. Folks, if you haven't been locked in and dialed in to Locked On Hoosiers, make sure you do that. Jacob does a phenomenal job over there, and you're not going to want to miss a second of it, especially all you Purdue fans who are hate watching this right now. Man, go find Jacob in the comments there.
Come check us out, man. You'll have a blast, I promise. We say nothing bad about Purdue ever.
That's right. That's why we love what we get to do, man. It's so fun. If you haven't checked out Locked On College Basketball, please make sure to do so. Subscribe to both these shows on video and audio so that you don't miss a second of all the great content. If you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we would love to have you in there as the season gets ramped up and going. The link's in the show notes. It's absolutely free to join. Well, folks, as we always say when we sign off, and it's so appropriate today, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.